today I have the honor to be facilitating a conversation with these two amazing and powerhouse women. And why I'm introducing it that way is because we are just a couple of days removed from an amazing event that we had at
Off the
REV.
chain.
Off the
Still buzzing.
chain, led by Monica and Erica. And here's just kind of like the overview. It was about women's hormones and cycles and creating harmonious hormones and connecting to themselves, especially for women. There were 50 plus women at this event, and I was the one lone dude there. And I was standing in the back corner, and man, I just loved it because I took it all in, and it was amazing information, stuff that I've heard Monica speak about for years, but the way that you guys delivered it to that to our community of 50 plus women was truly amazing and empowering. So before we dive into some stuff and kind of reviewing that, how do you ladies feel a couple of days removed from that?
I feel like just on fire and empowered and just so grateful to share the information.
We feel lit up by having these conversations, but then to share it with 50 other women, I'm still feeling like pulsations of that.
And this is like 50 women. It was a packed house. Like we actually probably couldn't fit any more, but like so many women couldn't come last second. So actually
It worked out perfectly. Yeah.
So we're going to do this again in the fall, a continuation of this and have more things available. But this was a result of years of Eric and I just like started as whispers to each other, and then it was like full on conversations, and then just like, whoa, this is something that is so needed. And also like we're hearing conversations in the consult room with so many people, and you're probably hearing them too, of just their hormones and their periods and going through menopause and not able to get pregnant, whatever it may be, or my hair's falling out, little things like this. There is a huge gap in healthcare and women's health in particular that is not being spoken about and not understood to begin with, that there's a missed opportunity for women to connect to this.
And I think it's no coincidence that women cycle up together. Like our natural cycles will start syncing together. We're meant to come together as women and talk about these things and normalize these things. And I think for us, this was just like opening the hatch just a little bit. And what came out, I'm like, this is needed. Like this has shifted me, it shifted you. But holy Toledo.
You guys definitely opened up the hatch. And I think you guys said, we're gonna be here like 75, 90 minutes. And we were 2 hours and 15 minutes in, and you guys could have kept going, which was...
Crowd was on their feet still.
It was truly, it was actually...
blaze to the end.
It was cool. It was, rapid fire section at the end, which is like just a testament to like the knowledge that you guys have. And again, it was a 2-hour plus class, a lot of information from PMS, from menopause, perimenopause, talking about their blood and all that stuff, which was very interesting as a male and a man to hear that stuff and hear just the dynamics and how like complex but also amazing the human body, the woman's body is. And so I think before, we obviously can't be on this video for 2+ hours, which I know we could with you ladies.
Well, you guys can come in the fall to the next class.
But maybe frame the picture of like, yes, we have these conversations with, our office is 85% women, so we have a lot of conversations. I'm the lone male that will do the consultations with these women, so I can't give necessarily the advice and the insight that you two have. But I think touch on like your guys' journey and like what you've heard and some of the dynamics that and the mindset that women have had and why this was such an important conversation.
I would love to share, and I actually really love that Matt is here for this, because if men should be listening to this too. Like if you're a man, you're like, maybe I shouldn't be listening to this. This is about women. No. This is actually really beneficial to understand your other half in a different way, whether you have a partner, a daughter, a mother, even a neighbor. Just to understand us more is really, really healing globally. But for my journey, I got my period, and again, these are all terms that we talked about. We don't have time to go into all of it. When I was 13, and I didn't know it was coming, I was very uncomfortable to even talk about it, and I had really bad cramps, like really, really bad cramps, where I'd be crying on the bathroom floor. And when I was old enough, I was put on birth control. I grew up in a very traditional household. We definitely steered more towards the medical model because that's all we knew. We didn't know any other way. So I'll just preface it with that. At 15, I was old enough to be put on birth control, hormonal birth control for my cramps. And then I was basically on that for about 7 years before I knew I could do something different. But from there, like my health journey really kind of was altered from that. And I'm 36 now, and I just had no idea that I could actually look forward to each and every phase of my cycle each month, and I could enjoy it and connect to myself in a deeper way. Like my 13-year-old self would have just been mind blown to knew what she could look forward to in all of these phases that were to come. I'm just super grateful that it was worth the wait, basically. But I've learned so much, and to help other women is such a gift.
I've been like reflecting on it since then too, because what you grew up in was a pretty standard, I'd say, way that most women I know at least grew up in, at least women I've chatted with. And I feel like there's either one way to do it where women like identify with their symptoms. They're like, even going into menopause, like hot flashes, cramps, headaches, and it's like, ugh. Or the complete opposite, where they're like, they push it away and they're like, I don't have symptoms. I don't even have a period.
Or they
Don't even talk about it.
know that it's associated with their
Yes.
cycle, or they don't even know.
And like, I think what we've done is just like create a middle ground, and like really honestly just hearing your story, hearing my story on almost the opposite end of the spectrum and coming together. I'm like, we can work with our bodies. I'm in on that. And it is a little bit different. And I think that's why it was so juicy that evening, because people are looking for those answers. And not that we have any answers, but information of like, what do I do during these cycles? What do I do during these seasons? And looking
Or what
at
are seasons?
what are seasons? Yes.
What are
literally.
seasons? What is
Yeah.
that?
We can get into so much here. I think the number one takeaway, though, that I really got from this is that we are wise women. Like, we are wise women, and we have different versions of ourselves throughout the month that men do not experience. They're pretty much constant, like sun beings. They wake up in the morning, they have energy systems, they go throughout the day, they're meant to use that energy, go to sleep at night, wake up in the morning, and kind of back at it. Women, however, fluctuate more like the moon, and we go through ebbs and flows and seasons. And I think as we got closer as friends, I started to ebb and flow with your seasons, you started to ebb and flow with mine, and it created like a normalcy. And even after the class, like people were like, oh my God, that color blood is normal? Clots are normal? And I'm like, oh my God, so much like stigma almost on all of this that we are even afraid to look at it. So I think that's, whenever I say open up the hatch, I'm like, we blasted that hatch open.
I was even talking to some clients about this before the class, and they're like, yeah, like even saying the word like period is so taboo. And this is actually the problem, is that it is taboo, but the original meaning of taboo is sacred. This was all sacred before it wasn't. And we can talk about why it wasn't. But like even growing up, it's just, I didn't talk about my periods. I didn't know I had a cycle. I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't even talk about my periods to my friends, to anybody. I grew up in the era where when tampons, different types of tampons came out, the sleeve of the tampon was quiet so that no woman in the bathroom or girl would know that I was on my period, so they would hear the wrapper opening, essentially. And that to me just breaks my heart of why it's shushed, because this is who we are, a huge part of ourselves, and thus a huge part of who we are as partners. And these things, again, it just feels like a missed opportunity that it's not talked about. So for these women to come in, it was like, oh, these topics that I've always kind of wondered about or not known anything about, now they're said. Oh my gosh, like I feel my power as women. Like we can give life. Like we are the keeper of the womb. Like I think to know your magnificence and your wonder and your beauty is what is not shared with when we were younger, and to understand that and embody that is our birthright.
And it is our birthright. It wasn't always like this. Like we had our moms and our aunts and our grandmas, excuse me, in ancient times would be like our teachers, our guides, and showing us our own magnificence and opening up doorways for us of how they were moving through life. It's one thing to go through your own life, but then to watch somebody a steps, season, whatever it might be, cycle ahead of you, to watch that unfold too. It's like that's how the wisdom got passed down, and we radically have disconnected from that wisdom. And then to connect with other women who are also experiencing like these little whispers of truth, it's like, I'm doing this to be a creator of my life. Like it's not just about like no more symptoms anymore for us. Like that's not even, we don't even have like conversations like that, but it's truly like our bodies have the power, the capacity to hold life. And if we're not holding life every single season, every single month, that same energy can be used and created for our own lives and birthing whatever it is we're meant to birth into this world. So I think it actually comes from like a clear system first, and then when people can start looking at their bodies as not something happening to them, but for them, we start accessing superpowers that are feminine, that are out of this world, and have truly changed the game for me.
I think one of the things that I got from the entire 2+ hour conversation was something that we have talked about behind closed doors in our own personal hanging out, just like that divine feminine that is really coming to the surface in the world. And you guys talked about like growing up, like you guys, your family didn't really talk about it, no disrespect to my dad and my family as well, but it was a very similar thing where my dad, just the way he was raised and the way we were raised, like we just didn't really talk about that. It kind of gave him, for lack of a term, the heebie-jeebies. It's like, no, I can't do that. And like one thing that I got from that, and that's not my mentality and that's not my thought process. I see the beauty, and especially being married to this goddess right here and just really understanding it more. But like, and I don't necessarily want to delve too much into and harp on the negative part, but there is a history of hundreds of years of the shifting and changing through, you talked about the Industrial Revolution, how things just kind of shifted, but like we've been almost like shunned away to even speak about it and even talk about it. And so again, just commending you guys for opening up that conversation. But I'd love for you to touch on like the little bit of the history that led up to this point, because it might help people to understand like, oh man, I didn't even subconsciously know that I've been, and again, not harping on it, suppressed from really feeling and learning and knowing the power within me.
I mean, either of us can start.
I can give an overview
Yeah.
because the overview is like just so easy to understand.
Yeah.
So back in the day, thousands and thousands of years ago, we were seen in all of our beauty, I would say, appreciated. We talked about things. Everything was out there essentially. And then it happened to where, like I learned this through like my natural birthing process of working with midwives and home births and stuff like that, is that the midwives are basically cast out and men came in as medical professionals, the Flexner report and things like that. But basically compared a man's body to a woman's body and basically thought that women had to be like men, essentially, as far as like the things that we went through on a monthly basis. Like we shift and we change and we can't be compared to what a man goes through. And so all the things that we do go through, it's just misunderstood. And we've been held to the standard of maybe what a man's health is. And I'm not saying it's anyone's fault or anything like that, but it's just been misunderstood. And so from that, women have kind of just been like, oh, I have to be a certain way, and I can't honor where I'm at each phase of my month, or I can't honor the transition that I'm going to when I am exiting my menstrual cycles and things like that. And so it's just been this thing where it's just misunderstood.
They titled it hysteria, right? They titled
Yeah,
it
like
different things.
melancholy.
Melancholy, yeah.
So many things.
You're
So
wrong
go
before-
into
yeah.
go into like a brief timeline. Erica's really good at talking
Yeah.
about that.
I read, I have no idea how long ago this was at this point, but I was reading about period blood, like I feel like 7 years ago at this point, because I was curious about my own self. And I started to read all these things about women who, as they went through their menstruation, they were learning like lessons and wisdom. And this is like ancient Mayan times. They were using these as almost opportunities to feel into their bodies, feel into symptoms, feel into creation, feel into the death process, because our uterine lining quite literally dies. No other process in our body goes through such rapid regeneration and degeneration simultaneously like our uterus. But I started reading about how ancient Roman, Greek, Mayan times, they would call menstruation fluid miraculum, and the things that they would do with it were like, if it was a really tough season on the crops, they would have women that were menstruating, and it was only like 20% of women at that point were would go through a full menstruation process, go through a full birth, go through a full menopause, and it was said when you're in menopause or perimenopause, whatever you want to call it, nomenclatures again, you were to gain all the wisdom of those previous cycles and no longer needed the cues, the symptomatology to tell yourself which way was left or right. Like those were street signs that we go through when we're menstruating. And by the time we get to like the menopause years, we are the wise women and we no longer need those street signs to know how to navigate. And I was just like, Oh my gosh. Of course, by the time most women that talk to us get to menopause, it's like they're so disconnected from their bodies, they're so disconnected, and there's also this huge like cultural thing too of just like subconsciously, 95% of everything we say or do happens on a subconscious level. So even these generations of almost like I think about this, like I haven't had a baby yet, but you guys, well, at least Monica for sure, probably Matt too, will certainly be there. And it's like that was so normal in past times where you would have friends and family members, and not saying that you would be the midwife, but you would have been at many births, and you would.
I would have been the midwife.
I know.
I would have been the doula.
Yeah.
That was sad.
And it's like, yeah, exactly. And it's like you would have had so much experience through your own process that whenever it came to like things like the Flexner report, they took like information in degrees over the experience that women have been cultivating for years and years and years. And a lot of that wisdom was not necessarily like A plus B equals C. It was extremely intuitive, and it was extremely almost like gray areas of how to move through a birth or how to move through menopause or anything like that. So a lot of the wisdom was passed down by experience, and our culture no longer valued that. So everybody that had knowledge or information, so to speak, rather than the wisdom based on the experience, we went with the information, and we lost a huge part of ourselves. So I think that's why it's such like almost like a rage that is coming through like the feminine right now of just being like so loud. But I think about like a pendulum swinging. And if we were at one point swinging in this side of the pendulum of using menstrual fluid for like wound healing and putting on crops and plants and using it for so many other beautiful things, to now looking at it as almost like, ew, like taboo, not even gonna look at that. That is a huge swing, and I think we're just finding our balance now. So not that one way was right or wrong, but our society started acting a little bit more masculine, and it needed to, for building infrastructure in schools, in buildings, and socioeconomic status. And I think we're now craving that feminine.
And I think an overview of why, like the intention of it
Yeah.
all is really helpful, because like when we were younger, it's like, oh my gosh, I have my period. Is that it? Like
Yeah.
what is this kind of thing? So like when we first menstruate, it's that we're able to bear children. That's really what the intention of that is. But within that, you're going through different seasons of your month, so to say, or we can say different phases, like follicular, all these things. You don't even need to know. So we're telling other women, like, take a breath and just know you don't need to know, what does it mean when I have too much estrogen, or follicular phase? Am I in this? Am I in that?
Yeah.
Shh, just don't do that. That's too heady, and it's not necessary. Like how we communicate and how we've learned is kind of a little outside of that, and I think that's actually really served us. And that's why all the information out there is kind of like that, and it's so not attractive or intriguing or giving answers to what people want. So within your month, you're going through different phases of like, I am ovulating, so I'm prepping to conceive. And then if I'm not, if the conception hasn't happened, then I'm basically releasing. So through those different phases, you're going to feel different. And so this is what most women don't know. So like, well, I just felt really enthusiastic last week, and now this week I don't. Am I depressed?
What's wrong with me?
What's wrong with me? What's going on? Or my period was really, really challenging last month, and this month it's worse. So there's not understanding that our body is dynamic, and it cannot be compared to the man's body at all. And that's been the issue, not only the misunderstanding. But so within that, we have so much wisdom that is available to us and lessons that our system is teaching us, which is why we sometimes feel certain ways during the month of like needing to really clean our house. Like Matt jokes about this when I'm like just going crazy, just like decluttering the house or whatever. That is a primal action that my body wants. Or these truths come out of me right before like my winter phase, which if you guys are at our classes, you'll know exactly all the phases. But the truths, which is PMS time, matters. So how you feel during that time matters. And so what our culture has done is just like, don't say that. Don't feel that. And so we've been shoved. I had an example of a tampon insert from 1963, which was How to Be a Happy Wife. And it was saying basically you shouldn't take advantage of your husband. So if you are feeling tired during certain times of the month, you can't do that, because he didn't marry a part-time wife. He married a full-time wife. So you should be happy and chipper every single day.
I did not approve that ad.
He did not.
I did not approve that for the
everyone
men.
in the room was like, oh, what? I'm like, this was how we were raised,
Yes.
is thinking that we had to be a certain way all the time, which is not honoring our cycles. So within our cycles each month, we're learning these wisdom, we're learning about ourselves, opportunities to connect within, so that when we are entering into the perimenopause phase, which is kind of like before we're done bleeding, we're no longer conceiving, we're actually prepping our bodies to enter into a completely different phase of life. We're transitioning to where we are no longer conceiving children, and we're entering into what Erica said, our wise years. And so if you've felt these times of when you are ovulating, you feel super creative, which is an increase in LH and FSH, which are certain hormones that you're experiencing. During those wisdom years, those are permanently elevated. So that's why it's so exciting to look forward to feeling creative, and just like you've gained all this wisdom because we have been synced up with our cycle and listening to our bodies. This is the intention, right? This is not the norm.
Yeah.
That as we enter into that time, now we can forward that information to the women before us, or that are coming, entering into that time. And this is where it's all out of whack, is that we don't understand what's happening. So our body's going to give us these symptoms because we're resistant to the aging. We're resistant to maybe the dreams that we once had, and we don't know how to come to terms with all of these things. Resistant to processing the stress that we've experienced. That's why our hormones are not able to produce the way that they're actually supposed to. Like when we're done ovulating, our body's no longer producing hormones from those organs. So actually it's from our adrenal glands. But if our adrenal glands are burnt out from all this years of unintegration and stress because we don't know how to process it, and we're living in a masculine way of go, go, go all the time, our adrenals can't produce the hormones like they're supposed to. Therefore, inserting things like HRT and all these things, which I'm not saying is anything wrong with that, but there's an alternative way.
Yeah.
There's always another way.
And that's like, I feel like what got lost too, where our ovulation time, essentially when we can get pregnant, like those women in ancient Greek, Roman, Mayan times were so revered because they were able to continue on the population of the community, the tribe, the family. And I think that most women, whenever we think about our cycles, they really like that one time of the month. Like they're more attractive, they have a higher sex drive, more energy, happier. And I think about that whenever I think about the terms of the seasons. If that's summer and then your bleeding is the winter and leaves fall off in the winter, snow in the winter.
There's no leaves in the winter.
Yeah, there's no leaves in the winter. It's like, it's almost like if leaves were falling off in the summer, it's almost like that's another signal for my body. Like we talk about this as like almost a report card for myself of like, I think it started with our conversations of like, I'm feeling like extra angry. How are you feeling? And we're in different cycles, different seasons, but also at the same time, like in where I was at in my life at that point, makes so much sense that my body would almost give me more intuition during those times and speak to me a little bit louder. And then during other times, it's a little bit more of an outward expression. So I like think of it like an inhale and an exhale now with my seasons. There's obviously 4 of them, but they're like essentially just hormone cocktails. And you're meant to act differently during these different times, and it's normal that you would only really value that one time or say like, that is me, that's who I am, because that's what our society has basically historically done, is just say the woman when she's ovulating is invaluable to society at this point, so we're going to use this.
And if you don't listen to the times that you don't feel that way or whatever, it just gets louder, which is the symptom.
Literally.
This information is like invaluable for both women and men, and something like interesting I'm thinking about when you guys are talking about like the wisdom that's passed on from generations. Like you talked about the Flexner Report, early 1900s, Rockefellers, the Industrial Revolution, and just how everything went so, for lack of a better term, allopathic, medical, masculine energy. And there is a place and a time and a season for that. But knowledge is the taking in of information, data, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, all these different scientific terms, and we want to measure our basal temperature and all that stuff. That's a certain energy, but what is wisdom? Wisdom is experience, and there is no man that I know that has had and birthed a child or has gone through these cycles
That I know of.
that I know of.
too,
So
yeah.
for lack of a better term, we shouldn't be the ones telling women what they need to do. Now, is there a place and time, certain things and experiences? Yes, absolutely. There's time for that. But I would probably say that a vast majority of people in our world and culture have been not brainwashed, but have just been their life has gone a certain way that that's what they think is the only path. But true wisdom is taking the experience from the women that have done this in a natural way. And I just love that you guys understand that, Noah, and opening up this conversation to more women to be able to do that, because the people before you have that experience, especially if they've gone through it naturally. And so, you touched on this also, and I would love for you guys to speak on this. Again, this is going to be however long this video is. We can't go the whole way, but you talked about perimenopause, you talked about menopause, you talked about PMS, the symptoms people experience, but we want to get away from symptoms, right? We want to get about like the power within that. But one thing that I really got from your guys' conversation is really to do with like what we talk about all the time at REV, the integration process of our past. Because yes, we have all of these hormones and chemicals and imbalances that may be happening, but if your body isn't processing the stuff from yesteryear, we're in this chronic state of stress, or we're telling ourselves a story that then creates the bad cramping, or every time I do this. So I'd love for you guys to touch about, like, for you guys, what you guys really spoke about is really like tuning in to your emotions, your story behind it, and the integration process, how impactful that is for people, not only during PMSing, not only during menopause, but perimenopause and all those things as well.
You asked like 30 questions.
I know. Well, I think the biggest question is like, why is it important to pay attention to our emotions, especially the emotions around what's happening for a woman in their cycle?
Oh my
So
gosh.
much to say.
There's so much within this, because everything is emotional. Like, everything is emotional. And we've been brainwashed to believe that the physical comes first.
Yes.
Like, oh, I just have neck pain, or oh, I just have irregular periods. Like, it's kind of just something random that happens when actually it's intended and it's meaningful, and it's there because of how we're living our life, maybe what was passed down to us generationally. But our emotions really, really matter and have meaning. So like, the body's going to express itself how it wants to express itself, which is, to me, when I learned that stuff, it was actually a big moment of curiosity of like,
Yeah.
oh, interesting. Like, why would I get headaches, but my friend Erica here has foot pain? Just something
Yeah.
really random like that. I think we don't even give ourselves this opportunity to become curious in the first place. These are even outside of maybe our things from our cycles, but
Yes.
it's all connected anyway. But I think understanding that who I'm being and what I'm feeling, my body actually experiences that on the back end. So like, when I think a certain thought, it's not only a vibration, but it releases certain hormones, a hormone cocktail in my body, and it's going to support my body, whether for good or for bad. So if I'm experiencing, and this is kind of a little outside your question, but we'll get back to your question. But if I'm experiencing sadness all day, every day, for the most part, because of some lack of integration, like Matt was saying, like, maybe I had a really bad breakup 5 years ago that I'm still bitter about and I'm unhappy about, or I was fired, or I didn't get this job that I wanted, or I had a loved one pass away and I'm really grieving from that still. I haven't processed it. My body is actually experiencing that hormone cocktail every single day.
Yes.
And especially if Erica said, like, all this is subconscious. So even if you don't know you're grieving, but you haven't processed it, your body knows that you're grieving. And so you're actually going to be experiencing those hormone imbalances and disturbances on a daily basis. And that's something that we have to talk about, because most people don't understand.
Yeah.
Everything actually is emotional first. And then from there, because let's say I'm experiencing all these stress hormones all the time because I'm really angry that I didn't get this job that I really, really wanted 7 years ago, then my adrenals are actually really burnt out. And all my hormones can't produce the way that they're supposed to. So everything's out of whack. So what I'm going to do is what most people say I'm supposed to do, is I'm just going to maybe take medicine to balance it out, or maybe remove a certain organ that's not functioning the way it's supposed to. This doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense when we think about it this way. We must go back to the drawing board and figure out why I'm feeling this way in the first place, and why my body's reacting this way before anything. I think that's the conversation before even your question that we have to talk
But it was more about that though. Like
Yeah,
when people
yeah.
come in all the time with and they'll share with us like, I have bad cramps or I have these symptoms, whatever. And then they go through the integration process, integrate things in their subconscious that are running the show underneath. And then, we sit down with them 30, 60 days later and it's like, oh yeah, I had my best period that I've ever had. And like, this is, from my perspective here, and I'm sure they share even more with you ladies, but like, that's how powerful healing these past wounds and traumas for the physical manifestation of the pain. Or whatever.
Yeah.
Let's talk about cramps. I think we should talk about the things that
that they want to hear about.
Like PMS. And then go into menopause. Just real quick and then touch on hormones.
Yeah.
Do this,
touch on
and then we'll just touch on like a few more things, and it's 2
These are
hours.
just like the highlight things that
it's
have
okay,
to be said.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, I feel like with what you're saying too, Monica, the biggest piece of this, yes, there's so much like old baggage. Yes, that is definitely subconscious programming and all of this we're talking about today with like what symptomatology is going on and how to move through it now. And I think the biggest advice I have for literally anybody with cramps or any kind of symptomatology is what Monica just said. There's a deeper meaning to this, but to really get to the bottom of a deeper meaning and not keep pushing this away, I think curiosity is the number one thing, and tracking this as a cycle, because if you have old emotions, like every cycle is essentially a conception, a birth, and then a death, essentially, whenever your uterine lining sheds. And I think about that, like we move through patterns within 21 days. We do something for 21 days and it creates a new pattern. Well, shouldn't this be the same thing with our cycle, with integrating old patterns too? Because if we're going through a birth, a death, and then essentially a renewal, that whole cycle could last only 21 days, whereas most people, I think, carry it. They're like, I'm going to have this for like the next 20 years. And then they keep playing that story out, telling that story. So I would say the number one thing I would recommend for people is to track the cyclical nature of what's going on, like what time period. And we gave people language with seasons and stuff, but what is going on? When does this happen? And more importantly, what would I want to be the case if my symptom was telling me something, what would I want to do with that? So I think tracking the cycle or the cyclical nature of things is really how I got to the bottom of like, what is actually going on? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden I realized, I'm like, oh, of course my legs would be itchy and dry, or I'd have like acne or all these other cramps, but it had to come from like me looking at it with curiosity first.
Curiosity and awareness is like first and foremost.
Yeah.
I really wanted to get into cramps because I think that is so normal, and that's what I experienced. And so for me, I'm like, oh, I have cramps. And what I heard a lot of like my classmates, and especially my teammates, I played competitive soccer my whole life, is just be so much easier to be a man. Like I don't have cramps. I don't have to deal with tampons and stuff like that. That right there is not understanding why the cramps are happening in the first place, and cherishing and understanding the beauty of that. Mm-hmm. That's what I wish if I could just time travel back and just tell myself, who was experiencing the cramps, of just knowing it's just my uterus contracting and it's inviting me inward to just feel my body more. So like things like cramps are actually just a resistance to being a female. So just the emotion behind that. So we can just resolve and soften the cramps by just paying attention, just feeling our bodies, versus when we feel pain, anyone pushes it away. We don't want to feel it. So we're pushing it away. So it's just going to get louder. That's what symptoms do. They're just like speaking, just like a kid. It's like, Mom, I would like some toast. And the mom's doing something else. Mom, I'd like the toast. Or I'm hungry, Mom. Mom's doing a million things. And eventually the kid's screaming, I'm hungry. You know what I mean? That's what the body's doing. It's just so simple to see it that way. But things like cramps, we just talk about that.
Yeah.
It's if we can just make it so simple, it's just your body wanting to connect deeper with you.
I have so much to say on cramps. It took me like literally, I was maybe the opposite of this. I didn't have like extreme cramps literally at all, really. I had other symptomatology. I'm not saying I was scotch-free with this. Like 85% of women experience painful periods.
85% of women report. I think it's probably 100% of women, because not everyone's reporting anything.
Yeah. And I really thought about this, but it took me almost a time during my cycle where, for whatever reason, I have really no idea why this came up so loudly, but we are people that if something is happening on the outside, like we're having a headache or something, I'm like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to sit with this, I'm going to be with this, where is this, get curious. And it took me having like literally the most debilitating cramps. This was several years ago at this point, but like cramps that were like brought me out of my body is what I would say. I was literally vomiting, literally blacking out, and I'm like, is this normal? But it took almost this heightened, like the most screaming that it could be, of me being like, this lives within me. Like, this isn't just something that just happened naturally. The body doesn't work like that. It speaks in whispers first. And it took me to have like this very, very loud experience and something I couldn't escape. This happened for like 6 hours. It was wild, but it took me to go in and I just started realizing like these are like pulsations. And the same way that our body can feel pain like that, it can also start to feel pleasure too like that. And I went into these cramps and I was just like, at the end of that first time, I started to get really curious for my next cycles of like, why do I feel this? Where do I feel this? And where is this coming from? And it started to invite me into such depths of myself that I had not even known existed. So it was an invite.
And I feel like within that, again, we're going through seasons each month. So when we are experiencing something like cramps, it's an invitation to just like slow down and honor where you're at. And so this is where the go, go, go mentality has hurt us, so to say, is that we're just like, oh, I just got to take Advil. I don't have time to experience this. I just have to push it to the side. I got to keep going. That's going to bite us in the butt when we're going through perimenopause and menopause, because it's trying to allow us to sync up to our bodies then and pay attention to it. So it's a couple of things to kind of recap the cramp situation is that medicine also has a side effect, but it's not going to solve the problem. That's what I would do. I would just take Advil to just not to numb my body basically, so I wasn't feeling it anymore.
Which leads me into like the next part, and I did want to say it's actually interesting, like we say it all the time, like when symptoms come up, it takes men a little bit longer to like tune into the symptoms that come up because our body is always speaking to us, and you guys have this innate every 28 days kind of thing to like give you a little like, hey, are you paying attention? It's this, it's like, oh, and you can kind of get like tune in like how your body's, responding. And then what have you been doing over the last 20 days? How your emotions been? What have you been eating? So it's like this check-in where men don't have that. And that's why we're kind of disconnected from it. So you guys have that gift as well. And so which again leads me to what you were just talking about was that I love the piece that you shared. I don't know if it was in the class or with me kind of privately, which you don't have to get into too much of it. It's just like what you do now through this time in your 20s, 30s, and 40s will really dictate how your menopause and perimenopause is. And like it's almost like if we do things now better, it's going to lead to a easier transition versus feeling that resistance. And then when you get to that place, it's very resistant. So I'd love you kind of just encapsulate like the whole phases of that.
Oh my gosh, so much. I want to say too first, Eckhart Tolle does talk about that women, he's a spiritual teacher, but he talks about how women have a better chance of finding higher consciousness, higher enlightenment, because we monthly go through something that brings us into our bodies in a way that radically is supposed to, like it's a mirror inward. We have those opportunities every month, and then we also have birth as well. So it's not that women, it's not that women are better than men, whatever it is, but it's almost like we have so many opportunities. And I think about those cramps for me, like I remember that day I had to come into the office and I'm like, well, I'm just gonna jump in the creek real quick and kind of do my thing. And I'm like, thank God my body spoke so loudly because I was trying to do that on the go thing. And I'm like, who knows what this would have been like if I would have kept that up. Of course, now I know that that's my invite to go inward, and I don't necessarily see it as a bad, wrong time. I actually see it as that is like my most intuitive time, and that if I'm on the go, of course my body's gonna have cramps to try to slow me down and want me to go and have these spaces for myself. It's almost like an invite now for me rather than something so loud and happening to me. Yes, something inconvenient that I need to like move through or push away or push aside. I'm like, okay, thank you for the update. I have been go, go, go. I need to slow down and sit down right here and just be with myself. And there was a study on this too. They took a bunch of women that were experiencing cramps, and it's so mental, emotional for women why we go through cramps in the first place. But what they did was they tracked how many days of the month women would go through cramps, and they had all these different treatments and all these different modalities. But the women who actually started tracking their cramps of what days it was, they not only diminished their time, but like their periods started to become more, I don't want to say like everybody's cycle is different, but it's almost like it was more in sync and it was more regular. What is regular? But it was more regular. And the women that weren't, the women that had the other modalities like Advil and things like that, those 3 days of pain, since they were ignoring it, they weren't even feeling the pain for the 3 days taking Advil or NSAIDs like that, it would eventually then be the next 3 days after that would still be pain. And it's like the body didn't get the whispers out in the first 3 days, it had to do it in the next 3, and then they still ignored it the next 3. And what they were finding was women, and this is what really spoke to me, women, even in our office, will tell us like, I have to go through this thing like 12 times a year every month? And I'm like, yes. And then some women, whenever their cycles or their symptoms will be so bad, they're like, I go through this almost 2 weeks of the year, or I go through this 3 weeks of the year. And I'm like, well,
I mean, of the month.
or excuse me, of the month, yeah. Thank you.
I'm like, that's actually not
Yeah,
good.
not good. But that's why I have you. But they were going through this, basically they were finding the women that looked at it on a mental emotional status, those symptoms actually diminished, and the women that were going from outside in things, their symptomatology actually just spread through many more days throughout the month. Like, it's like our body needs to express this, and if we don't let it, it will start screaming.
And back to your question about why does it then transfer into perimenopause and menopause? So I was just talking to a woman today who's just going through a horrible perimenopause time, which is the transition from menstrual bleeding into no longer bleeding. So menopause is when you're completely done bleeding. She's just like, it's just been so hard. And we don't understand what's happening to us. Like, she's in that age group essentially. And I'm like, it's because you guys weren't prepared. Like, you solely weren't prepared. And this is not something that her and I obviously have walked through, but we have worked with so many women who have and beyond. And this is all the research that we've done out of curiosity of like, what are we preparing ourselves for? Because it's not something that's all of a sudden going to happen one day. We are who we are being now, and how we are connected to our cycles is going to determine how we transition through that beautiful opportunity, which is going into menopause. Our culture sees it as they don't revere aging. That's an issue. So when you are going through menopause, subconsciously, 95% of us, we have to come to terms with the purpose that we had. Again, subconsciously, if you're like, my purpose is not to bear children. I'm just saying, primally, our bodies, women in our younger years, are made to bear children. So as we are exiting that time of bearing children, subconsciously, 95% of us, a piece of us, has to come to terms with, that's no longer my purpose. What is my purpose? And again, if we're not looking at these things because we haven't been connected to our cycles, all of them when we were younger, it's hard to connect to it during that phase because everything feels loud. It's like all this it's like there's music playing, there's a garbage truck, all this stuff is happening. It's like, whoa, what's happening? I'm having hot flashes because we haven't connected in our younger years to those opportunities. That's why it becomes so hard and so loud later. So that's like what you're kind of getting at. And that's the part where I've been sharing with so many women, and all of them are like, that makes perfect sense. Because the ones who are having a hard time going through that transition, I asked, how were your periods when you were younger? Oh, terrible. I hated them. Worst time every month. And then they start to understand what I'm asking. They're like, okay, I see what you're saying.
Yes.
Now. Like, that's why this is so challenging now, because I never connected back then. And not to say that if you're like, well, that's me, I'm going through a really hard time. This is called integration, is that you can heal the past that way and come to terms now and understand what's happening in your body. That way you can smoothly transition into this beautiful next phase of your life, truly. Wisdom years.
The same is true for, like, I think of like our, like when you're really young and you're going through menarche, you're not bleeding at all, and then you're bleeding, and then you're going through this transition phase of your hormones. We call it perimenopause, people call it menopause, and then you go through menopause, and like those are seasons within themselves. So even people that have cramps or they're having like PMS symptoms, I start asking them, because this is all that lower first root center anyways. So in our line of work, all that tension, all that old accumulated stuff in that first center, like, it's no surprise. I'll start asking them, like, what was childhood like? What was like growing up like? What was going on at those times? Because even like you guys' daughter Lion now, she sees us and she is in her like what would be called like a spring. Like, she's creating ideas of what it would be like for her to be a woman right now by asking us.
Downloading.
Yeah, it's downloading.
She's seeing the women in her life and be like, oh, this is that.
This is
And we are
possible.
so open. I think this is the beauty of our children, even my son. Like, I want him to be involved in these conversations.
And he is.
Yeah, that's really important. Just like Matt's involved in these conversations. Men are welcome.
Yeah,
Men are welcome.
very
They should
welcome.
be welcome.
But it's like these are seasons that lead into each other. So it's like I always like feel like for me, whenever stuff goes on for me now, I look back to almost like even before I was bleeding of like what dreams, desires, hopes, aspirations did I have? Because am I fulfilling those now? Because I know that these are cycles of renewal now that are leading me to cycles of wisdom later. So it's like the cycles of the seed planted from young ages of maybe having your voice lessened or whatever it might be, something that happened that still sticks with you essentially. Those things keep playing up almost as opportunities, because I think the body shows whatever is meant to be healed when it's meant to be healed. Like when we're working with people, like whatever's meant to come up will come up. And I think the same thing for symptoms like cramps or anything. It's like, that's perfect timing. And like how Monica said, why does she get headaches and I'd get like foot pain or something like that? I think these are divine messages meant for you.
Yeah, I love this conversation so much for so many reasons. I do feel honored that you guys had me on here to be able to kind of just chat with you guys, because like you talked about my daughter Lion, our daughter Lion, like to grow up with a mother and an aunt and people around her that can have these conversations in a world where that isn't the norm. I think it's so important. You know, you shared that passage out of like the poem that like imagine, and I might mess it up, but essentially like imagine a childhood where when they're going through this process of their first menstruation, that your mom and your aunts and everyone take you somewhere and you pierce your ears and you do this beautiful experience, versus what you had. Like, I had it, you never talked about it, and then you had that negative contraction. Like, I'm just so grateful that our daughter has that, and hopefully more people watching this conversation now can start just that, having more conversations, both with women and men as well, because there is definitely the divine feminine that is rising in this world, and the masculine is also important as well, and the masculine doesn't need to suppress that, and the feminine doesn't need to suppress the masculine, attack, right? It's like, how can we all come together? And it's understanding the past, but not letting it dictate our future. So to kind of close out this conversation, any last pieces that you want to share from your class, or that you think people need to know? Because again, this is a long conversation and can be longer, but any last little
I think
bits
I
of
just kind
wisdom?
of want to wrap up a tiny bit with understanding hormones in like
Yeah.
1 minute. Hormones are so misunderstood and so confusing. So if you're confused by hormones, that's okay. Most people are, and I understand why you are. Hormones essentially are just a response to our environment or to ourself. So when I'm thinking a certain thought, my hormones are going to respond. If Matt, like, I'm not going to say he would ever do this, tries to punch me in the face. It's just or Erica tries to punch me in the face, my body's going to respond. So my hormones are going to respond. So our hormones, it's not an accident what's happening. So like our life and how we live our life is, our hormones are going to respond to our life. So this is just, we don't have time to go into this more, but just an invitation to, again, take inventory. And we say this a lot of your life, your marriage, your career, your friendships, and just say, and what maybe my relationships to the devices I have in my life, like, am I on my phone a lot? How do I feel when I'm on my phone? Those kind of things. How do I feel when I'm eating? How do I feel when I look in the mirror? All of these things matter with how your body's going to respond. So if we have a very harmonious environment, I'm going to have a very harmonious hormone environment in my body. So this is something that instead of, if my estrogen is too high or my testosterone is too high or whatever it may be, progesterone is not even there, instead of looking real quick to take medicine to fix that, let's look within and let's really address it that way. Let's look at my life. Let's look at my life before now. What has happened? What am I still processing? Because my body's going to basically react to that and create this chemical cocktail that I'm basically swimming in every single day, for good or for bad. So I just want to shift the paradigm of how people view hormones, because I think that's really serving to see it in that way, and more empowering versus being a victim to it. So this is a longer conversation. And again, we're going to have another seminar this time in the fall to dive into more of these concepts and provide you guys with more tools that you can actually take home with you and use, that can really, really change the game for you, for your daughter, for your sister, for your neighbors, for the world, for your son, all these.
And men invited too.
And men are definitely invited and encouraged to come, because this is for all humans, just to understand the female body and what an embodied woman is to begin with. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We really trust that you found value and clarity and answers within this conversation. And if you like this, please share this with a friend. Please subscribe to join us next time. We can't wait to see you.